Okay, welcome back everyone to the My Generation podcast. Today we are talking with Lewis Schofield, and we're going to be talking again about the novel writing process. We had a chat with Jorge, a former CSR presenter and novelist, about his writing process. And Lewis Schofield, who's also a film production student, wanted to come at us with a slightly different angle on novel writing. So welcome to the show.
Hello, first time guest, and after this comes out, first time viewer.
Lovely, yeah. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you're talking about your novel writing process. What are you working on at the minute, firstly?
Well, I'm a fantasy writer, primarily. What I'm working on at the moment is a outline for a 5-book series that I have started to write. I'm 3 chapters into the first draft, and 4 books planned in total out of the 5.
So quite an epic adventure. You've got your 4 out of 5 into the planning. Do you do most of your planning before you start writing then, or does it vary?
This is a relatively new sort of process I've been trying since the summer. Before it, I finished a novella, which anyone doesn't know is like a very short novel, but not very short. 17,500 words to 40,000 is the sort of term for it. That was my return to writing after a hiatus. And the approach I took for that was to think how it goes start to finish before I write it. And that's what I'm taking with this approach. I'm outlining each chapter of the series. So I've done 190 out of 250.
Wow.
Last book, 60 chapters.
And so there's clearly a lot of planning that goes into it. What sort of genre would you say this story falls within? Definitely
epic fantasy. But in terms of like the subgenre, it kind of moves from heroic into dark as it transitions through.
And so I imagine a lot of research goes into this as a pre-planning, as opposed to being like more historical, where you've got to sort of look up locations and find out all the bits that make those locations unique. You've got to sort of create your own, really, haven't you? Yeah,
the world building is one of the most difficult parts. I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out, but what I have sort of figured is that I start with the characters in the story first and build the world around that.
Yeah.
So if I add a new character or a new element, then this is why I have to plan everything first, because otherwise it's a messy first draft.
Yeah.
Even more of a messy first draft. And so I would fix it. With the outline I do, it's sort of a lot of retconning and fixing what I have in the past. There are 2 types of writers, they say, a gardener and an architect. I think I fall in kind of the middle, because I both plan but let things grow.
Well, what are the difference between those 2 types?
Well, the architect plans a lot. Before even putting pen to paper, it's got all the plans laid out for like a building. Every structure, the floor, what your purpose is, used for, who's going to be there, all that. The gardener plants a seed, sits back with a cup of tea, and watches. Mine is both, because I plan quite extensively, but I leave it open. So when I imagine it, there's like several different layers. The first layer is the general world and story and characters, the first images, the seeds of ideas. The second, chapter outlines, a lot more detail. That's more of the pacing of individual novels.
Yeah.
And the third is the third draft. That's where I get the feel for characters. And moving down layers, stuff changes, and when you change stuff, it ripples out.
Yeah, so you plan some of it going in, but you still leave yourself open to actually changing throughout the process.
Yes, I find though that it's more the characters that change rather than plot elements.
And obviously, sort of fiction work tends to reflect the person and the place that they're writing within. Is there bits of sort of today or the real world that does actually creep into this fantasy element?
I'm not sure, because it hasn't been fully written yet or complete. But I think, coming from a very modern standpoint, because I think we're probably in a very postmodern era of fantasy, or at least arriving into it, and I think fantasy is changing, especially with a lot more diversity coming into it. And I think that is changing how people write as well. It's inevitable. And I think what I'm doing with it is trying to be better with characters, move away from stereotypes. So I think it changes how I approach character and elements of story and lore. A writer's work will in some way reflect the time that they live in.
And so going forward into writing new drafts of it, do you think it'll also change based on you as a person? So you're going to change and go with the writing as it updates?
Yeah. What I am planning to do is write... I'm not going to do a full first draft and then do the second like I did with the novella. What I've decided to do is split it into blocks. So I'll do the first 6 chapters first draft and then edit that into a second. And that way, the changes I make will ripple out through.
So you think you're almost going to do this in blocks? So
Yeah.
perfect one block, then go to the next, then to the next?
Yeah. Because otherwise, if I did 30 chapters as one, that takes about maybe a year and a half to do a first draft. Because it takes a very long time to do a first draft, but it takes a very short time. Reference for the novella, which 30,000 words, 6 chapters, it took on and off 7 months to write.
Yeah.
But it only took 3 weeks to do the second draft.
Okay, because you sort of knew what you wanted to do, because you'd done a lot of pruning as you went along.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of streamlining all those chapters.
First draft is like sort of, you just in some sort of linear fashion put down a lot of ideas and things that happen, and the second draft is about reordering them,
Yeah.
putting them in the right way. With the second draft, that's when you work in foreshadowing and you can connect things a lot better, and I find it flows a lot easier once I've done that filter.
And sort of more layers might even reveal themselves as you're going, because you'll go back over and realise there are things you needed to add and write about.
When I did the novella, I got up to the first draft, chapter 5, and this was in April, around that time. And I was writing this long dialogue scene between this character and characters he hadn't seen for like a decade, so his past coming back to him. And it was then I realised, this guy's gay. Like, I didn't even realise that in the first draft, and I realised it makes more sense for that.
So you think it serves the narrative better?
Oh, yeah, because there was medieval sense, I was sort of going for, he has to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
And without giving anything away, there's a reason beyond that why he has to keep that part secret, and it's something that detaches him from people. And it was something I didn't realise when I wrote the first draft. And then when I did the second draft, it completely changed the meaning of the first chapter, and it completely changed my approach and style to it. It worked a lot better.
Well, sometimes
just 10,000 words.
Yeah, just changing a character detail can flip a story, can't it?
Oh yeah,
anything.
That's the same when back to the outlining. That is a lot of stuff changes, especially when you're working on it. When you have to change something that happens. If it's a small detail, like I had this character that's in books now, book 1, 2, and 3, but originally just 2 in the beginning of 3. Recently, I decided he only has 1 arm, so it doesn't change anything. But another change I did was quite drastic, and that change would ripple out throughout it all.
Okay.
And at the moment, nothing has happened that changes anything on a large scale. But if that does happen, that could potentially take the story in a different direction.
And because you know it's there, it means it always kind of sits under the text. So if dialogue were to come up that might get near that subject or whatever it is, the character would obviously respond differently to it.
Oh, yeah.
Now that you know that information's there.
When I do the first draft, that's when I sort of consider that's when I discover the characters in a more meaningful way. Because I'm an actor. I developed my skills as an actor throughout my years as a writer to help me understand characters. Because sometimes I think the Asperger's I have does put me in a little bit of disadvantage of understanding and empathising. So this helps. And so when I do the first draft, this takes a long time, I think, because I'm trying to understand the character and the way they think and speak and move and see the world. But then again, that helps with the second draft because I can just instantly use skills as an actor, get into character, and I can switch quite quickly between two. It works very well in dialogue.
Yeah, because as an actor, you have to be jumping between characters all the time, don't you?
Yeah. It's something that I practiced without even knowing what it was for, but it makes sense looking back over the last 8 years.
And so the differences between acting and writing, you obviously get quite a lot of different things from them. How do they compare?
They don't.
They're two different animals.
They're two sides of the same coin, I'd think. Well, yeah, you could say the difference is a house cat and a panther. What from my perspective of it, acting is a lot more of a physical thing, whereas writing is a lot more of a slow burn.
Film's also a quite collaborative process.
Oh yeah.
Writing can be different. It can be collaborative if you want it to be.
There are good examples of collaborative.
Do you collaborate with writers at all, or for this project specifically, or are you just sort of looking outward into the world for yourself and just writing yourself?
Oh, this is me. This is my return to writing, so it is me. But I would be open to a collaboration. I think it would be interesting. I did during I call it my training years.
Yeah.
Which is when I started at 13 to, I suppose now, still, it never ends. I did at one point start writing something with a friend, but we gave up because we were both realised that this was going terribly. We didn't know what we were doing.
But
and we
that's
both
also
went away
fine.
and came back better writers.
Yeah, well, you go away and try your own thing on your own and come back. Also, novel writing can be a little bit more accessible at a young age as well. I know I started writing at 13 as well, and if you've got no friends that are filmmakers or storytellers and they're all doing their own thing, it's a great thing that you can do.
Yeah,
yourself.
I approach writing. I don't know if this is a bad way to approach it, but it was. It took a long time. I wasn't much of a reader. I don't read a lot, so I approached writing with a blind ignorance, which is perfectly fine. I mean, I got a lot of things that I think worked, but there was so much that didn't, especially the writing and my handwriting, which is unreadable.
Obviously, you've transitioned now from being a young writer who didn't read so much. Do you read now, and does that influence your work?
Yeah. One of the writers I've read that really influenced my style was Hemingway.
Okay.
Read A Farewell to Arms, fell in love with his. It's a journalistic style, so it's quite blunt and short, which was very different at the time because novels in the 20s, at least at that time, were very long and elegant sentences.
Yeah.
And I like what he did with dialogue, in which it kind of reads a little bit like a screenplay because it's back and forth between two characters and there's nothing else but the dialogue. So you're up to yourself to interpret the cadence of their voice, how they say it, the meaning behind it, the hidden meaning behind it. It works as well because it leaves it open to a lot of interpretation for me and I can draw my own conclusion. And that's sort of what I try and do with my dialogue, because I think, as an actor, I think my dialogue is the best part of my writing at the moment.
And, well, that makes a lot of sense because you're constantly working with it. Would you say then that even though you're going to be obviously fine-tuning your writing, would you say that the influence of trying to make sure that everyone is able to keep an open-ended approach to it is highly important, despite the fact that you are trying to make a focused story?
I think ambiguity is important in any story, especially when it comes to characters, because I'm of the belief that you can never truly know someone or yourself. So you can be surprised. I write and sometimes I get surprised by what a character is doing or says. So, but with ambiguity, yeah, I think, yes, you need to be clear, but at times you need to be unclear. It's not about answering questions, it's about, well, not just answering questions, it's about also giving questions.
Yeah, and so do you ask questions of your characters throughout? Is one of your processes of creating characters like maybe seeing what they would say to questions that never even feature in the novel? Because I know that's one approach I've heard people take. Or what's your process with the preparation of character before you go into the novel writing?
Oh, well, it starts with character for me.
The beginning.
Yes, and that's, well, again, because the actor, but it's more often than not, it's the character that sort of draws me in. In the series, I got one character, one of the first, and the way I would get the plot is I would follow through that character's eyes. Most commonly a he, because I'm a guy. Kind of works that way with the method approach, as I call it. But I see it through his eyes and all through his eyes. So a lot of that character is me at first. It changes as it changes, but in terms of like big questions, yeah, there's that. Sometimes I would have like just play out a debate between two characters who are talking about a subject. Can't really think of anything specific except for, and this is in the first book, a question about, well, killing, because it's fantasy. This character who is young, has never killed before, and he kills someone for the first time. Now I think that's a very turning scene for a character, the first time that they do something that is out of character.
Yeah, and that can apply to literally anything, and that's so it's like turning points, like we've discussed sort of in directing modules at uni and screenwriting and everything, where what are the turning points within a scene or story as a whole, and you're trying to sort of put some of those in like every scene.
When I was outlining things I would build to would be big moments, because big moments in a novel, so I'd have like, all right, chapter 30, there's going to be this big moment, clash of characters, big thing. And that's what I build up to. And even though there's big moments, they're the big moments. I find it's the smaller moments that I like more, when it's between one or two characters or a small group. That's the part that really gets me, and that's the part where the characters are developed.
Yeah, because like if you have just a tiny little interaction, but then like tells you a lot of detail about them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I really like, and one of the things that really inspired this was season 8 Game of Thrones. For all its faults that people have pointed out and that I can see, one of the things it did that I found interesting and I enjoyed was that they were bringing character lines together that hadn't been before, hadn't been for a while. So everything was having a return, there was new character interactions, and that kind of inspired me to take that approach, to do, well, of course these people are going to run into each other. What effect does that have on them?
Yeah. Well, it's because it's interesting. I was going to ask about inspiration because Game of Thrones is sounding like a very Game of Thronesy kind of story.
It was. I feel like it's hard to avoid that. We're in a post-Game of Thrones world. I mean, everything's going to be compared to it for at least the next decade.
Yeah, and are there any other sort of inspirations? Maybe something away from
away from fantasy.
Yeah, away from fantasy. If you got
well,
any.
we move away from fantasy. It's more of that moves more into inspiration for acting and film, which then that filters and bleeds through back into writing. So it all connects. If I'm reading something and if it just doesn't click with me and I can't see the world clearly, I lose interest.
Yeah.
And if I lose interest in my own writing, how can I expect anyone else to read it?
Yeah. And so, in terms of an interest thing, would you say, because you're building quite a big world, you want people to be invested in it quick, first chapters, what are they like to write? The opening of a story?
They're the most important. They're the grip. First line is quite good, but really it's like with films, you know, when we've been talking about screenplays and films and it's like by page, I think 16, something has to happen, otherwise people will lose interest.
Yeah.
And it's like that with books. You have to keep their interest. I've seen a lot of kids' books I used to read, like Percy Jackson. There'd be like a little cliffhanger at the end of the chapter. That keeps you attached.
Yeah.
With books like this, you've got to find a way to get people to engage. But first chapters, they're always the easiest and most difficult to write. Yeah. They take the longest because you're discovering the style of the story itself.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to film, like you've paid to sit in a cinema, so you're going to give it a little bit more time before you lose interest because you sat there and you've paid already. But with a book, almost, you can take it or leave it. So does it have to happen earlier, would you say?
It doesn't have to. You can put the hook in at any time. But it is good to have something, because you do need something that's a first act break that will do something that changes it and drives the momentum. But the best way to build up to that first pivotal moment is to do something interesting. Like what I do with my novella, I started with the character Fletcher, and I started with him trying to leave his house. Normal thing. And then from that, I delve into the fact of why he hasn't been able to leave, and that there's a box in the corner that has 3 dragon eggs, and the reader, or at least you could assume subconsciously or consciously, those eggs are going to hatch at some point, and there's going to be 3 dragons running around. So it's about promising something and paying off that promise.
Like Chekhov's gun.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in terms of you've written a novella, you're currently doing this. Is there any other writing, maybe even away from sort of the fiction realm potentially, that you've been doing that's also sort of bled in? Like you said with Hemingway, felt like quite a journalistic approach.
No, I like to have the freedom to expand with geography and maps and where they can go, because otherwise I have to do a lot more research and learn maps of the areas.
Well, we're going to be going back to Lewis in just a moment. We've got still lots more to talk about, but that's what we've had to say so far about the novel writing process again. But do you have a story to tell about the subject? If so, feel free to contact the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast, or leave us a comment here on YouTube. Over the next coming episodes, we'll get your thoughts in, so we really want to get the conversation going. I wanted to drive next into the local impact of novels in the area of Kent and novel writing. What if someone's living in the area of Kent and they want to start writing novels? Are there groups, are there processes or things that they can do locally to hone their novel writing skills?
Well, there is if they're students of a university, there's often a creative writing society. Waterstones do have authors coming in every so often, but periodically, like almost every fortnight. There's always a disappointing outside. But if you wanna get better as a writer, the best advice I've ever heard is you got to write and you got to complete stuff. You got to get start to finish. Start small I started small, well, relatively small with a novella, but it's the first thing I completed since I wrote that really bad fantasy novel when I was 13, and completing it felt really good. I even sent the first 10,000 words into a contest. To work towards a goal is something. I was watching a video this morning about a writer talking about his process, and one thing I noticed on his desk was this plaque, and it had a saying, and it said, "The deadline is the greatest motivation." And
do you put deadlines in for yourself then for certain parts of the process to be done by?
They're loose deadlines, but I would like to say by December I want to have 6 chapters first draft done, book 5 outlines complete. But that might not be that really difficult because book 4 took 2 months.
Yeah.
60 chapters. Experimenting with length recently, that's been a good thing.
But then also it's setting the deadline, but not also putting so much pressure on yourself so that if you miss it,
no, if you're going to stress about it, what's the point? It should be something you enjoy. But if you're doing it and it's not fun, what's the point?
Yeah, but you clearly just enjoy actually writing through the process.
I feel like I'm like Hitchcock. I think I enjoy the pre-production more than the act. It can be frustrating at times, but at times it can be magical.
So you've set loose deadlines.
So it's sort of like when I did the second draft, it was in June, and I was in student accommodation, so I was leaving 23rd of June. So I was like, I want to finish it before I get home, and I did. I aimed for 2,000 words a day, and it was done in 15 days.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So you've got like crunch time, and you've got time where you can be a bit more loose, and then just.
I feel like the first draft is you can be lazy. I can write it at any time. I can write it when I'm super tired, when I'm awake. Yeah, that's all of them. And, but with the second draft, that's when you put on your thinking cap. That's when you focus and you get everything done and worked. That's where the hard work is.
Yeah, because I think second draft's easy because you're sort of in flow for the first draft and it just can happen. But then second, you've got to really stop procrastinating on it. I think it's much easier to procrastinate a second draft.
I did this first chapter, which of the time in which I tried. Still, I had a return to writing in 2015, and I wrote 2 chapters to 2 different stories, and they took a long time. One of them took a full year.
Yeah.
It was only 5,500 words, but they still stand up as. Compared to what I've written now, they're still quite good.
Good.
Because of the time. But that was all part of the process. I used to really hate that I wasn't writing. The writer who wasn't writing, the writer who was not working, making no progress. But I look back on it now and I see I was actually learning without realising. I did a 85,000 word outline of a different 5-book series. And that was sort of the early stages of what is now my process.
Yeah, and so looking to the future now, because you've got the bedrock in place.
Yeah.
When are you looking to finish this? When you're looking for draft 3, 4, and then the finale?
Oh well, I don't know if I'll be doing a third draft. It really depends on how the second draft goes. I mean, the novella, I'm only tweaking it now. I'm not doing a third, but that might change. Time will change everything. But with the first book, because if I did the whole first draft as one, that would take about a year, and maybe like a month on the set or 2 on the second draft. But if I do it like this, I'm thinking it'll take a year, and I'll have 2 drafts. So I'm hopefully this by a year. Then I'm going to take a year off and do something else, because it'll be the 10th anniversary of when I first started being a writer in 2021. So I'm going to return to the original work with the knowledge I've attained, the skill I've acquired, and see how that improves.
Nice.
And then I'm hoping at least a year and a half on each book at most. So I'm thinking definitely have this series done before I'm 30. And then it's on to series number 2 and all the others I've got already planning. Because this one I'm planning and writing without leaving much of a gap. And I don't want to do that all the time, because I would like to have a full plan, sit on it, and then go back.
So you look, because then that gives you time to reflect.
So while writing this, I'll be out. My secondary projects will be doing outlines.
Yeah.
Getting the next series ready.
And you got a fresh pair of eyes coming back.
Yeah.
And so are you looking to distribute, to publish then once you've got it? Yeah.
I'm gonna fix up my novella, send that off to literary agents I can find. See where that goes. Use that as like a foot in the door.
Yeah.
And hopefully by that time I also have something to show of this first of the 5-book series, which hopefully will work because commercial that way. Because series, they can make some money if they're good.
And obviously you're starting small, which is good with the novella, and then you can go bigger into novels. Oh, he's brought it with him.
Yeah.
This is the novella. He's got it all there, and but it's not stapled, unfortunately, listeners.
No, this is an outdated one because I did some tweaks to the first chapter after. Because one thing that I've learned is that writers could be very protective of their work. So you it's good to have objective eyes. I learned from a year of creating the professional writing we did this nice exercise where you write 250 words, pass it to the person across from you. Now you cut 50 words out. And that taught me you got to be subjective with your work. You got to treat it as if it's somebody else's.
That's a really good task, actually.
Yeah.
I'd recommend that to anyone. I haven't even tried that, but that's...
Yeah, it's very good. It's about not using too much words. It's about using it as few as possible because less is more.
Yeah.
At times.
Have you heard about like trying to tell a story in like the least words possible, and like what's the shortest stories you can tell in like
flash fiction is?
But I mean like
2,000 words.
I mean even like 7 to 10 words stories.
Possible. I know Stephen King did a tweet. that was a horror story.
Because I think the shortest we got taught this in our English classes, and I think someone said the shortest story they've ever heard was that still had impact was "Baby shoes for sale, never worn." And it's 6 words, and it paints a picture of baby shoes for sale, never worn. Gives a lot. You immediately start to think about what that means, and it's 6 words. So if you can tell a story like that in 6 words,
I don't think I could tell my stories in 6 words.
Yeah,
I can't even summarize them in a sentence. They're too big in my head at the moment. I feel like I have to finish them.
Almost it comes down to an essence. So like you've got Jaws in space, which is 3 words sum up. What would you say would be like your brief, like if you had to sell this to me and the listeners in just a couple of words, what would you be saying in just a sentence?
I'll do both just to see how it works because one's completed, one's not. Dragon's Curse. I would say it's about a man coming face to face with his past that he regrets. It's about dealing with one's own trauma and regrets and guilt. I'd say, well, I don't know how to describe it, but the first, I can give you the title of the first book for that one. It's called The Sword in the Tower. And I'll tell you about the first chapter. A guy, I suppose you could call him the main character, it's hard to say at the moment until I've gone through the first draft. He breaks into this tower and steals a sword. And what I like about what I do in that first chapter and the title, going back to what we said about first chapters, is that I fulfilled the promise of the title. It's called The Sword in the Tower. He's stolen the sword from the tower. And that means the story could go anywhere from that. So that's what I'm hoping that effect would be.
Nice. And you've set up a promise, and you've Chekhov's gunned it, and now you've got people after him. So you've got a classic trap there within screenwriting.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go back. We've just got another question to ask Lewis to end off the episode, but I want to tease a few more topics that we've got coming up on the podcast.
All right.
So coming up very soon, we've got Dan Inwood. He's coming back to the show. He's going to be talking about travel. We have him. He's basically our quarterly podcast guest at this point. And he's going to talk about some of the travel he's done over the last 6 months, and having a catch up with him. We need to see what the last 3 or 4 months have held for Dan. Then we've got Enna, who you know well.
Drama Society.
Yeah. We've recently had James and Alara on talking to us, and now Enna's going to be doing an episode with us. And Harry Monday, who you also know.
Yes.
He's going to be talking about swimming.
Swimming,
because he is he used to be a swimming coach, I believe.
Okay, I might be a first time listener for that one then.
Yeah, even better. Well, that episode comes out in a couple of weeks as well, and we've got a few more in between then. But we'll be going back to Lewis in just a moment to wrap up the episode of the My Generation podcast, but there's future topics that we're still looking for people to talk about. We want to find someone who has travelled across the world and back. Do you live in Kent, but you've been all the way to Australia and back? If so, we'd love for you to get in touch. And if you're between the ages of 18 and 30 and you live in Kent, do contact the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast or comment below on YouTube. And we had Mike Hugh on the episode 9 of the podcast. He was talking about his travel. We want to go back to that topic. Dan's going to be talking about it too. Similar subjects. Let us know what you have to say. But Lewis, we ask every single podcast guest this question at the end of the episode. I'd like to just ask what you think you've learned from talking about your novel writing process openly here today.
I've learned that I actually have been working towards this for the past couple of years. Working towards it, I have a plan. It's a lot clearer in my head. I've actually been figuring this out for a few months. So when I found out about your podcast, I thought like, yeah, this could be a good platform to talk about it, and then just subtly play it when I'm hanging out with my brother and just say, hey, I've been listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
You want to listen to this episode? And then see how long he notices that it's me. Little surprise for him.
Yeah. Well, no, it's good that you're sort of aware of the process as well, and yeah, you've had a bit of time away to research, and now you're back and you're ready to write. Well, we'd love to have you back on the podcast, Lewis.
I'd love to be back.
And maybe even once you're further down the line with looking to publish, especially the novella, we'll get you back on to talk about what maybe the publishing of it's like.
Yeah, I would very much like to be interested. I'd be very much interested in that process of that part of the world, because that's the next logical step for me.
So once you've been through that journey of getting your novella springboarded, do come back on the show and we'll talk about it in more detail.
Of course.
Cool. Well, that concludes this week's episode of the My Generation podcast. We've got Dan Inwood, we've got Enna, Harry, so many great new topics to take you through the new year. We're still in the early months of it. It feels weird because we're recording this at the tail end of 2019. But
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year's been and gone already.
When this comes out, I'll be 22 then.
Wow.
Yes. That makes me.
Do you know what? I'll be 21 when it comes out. We're actually even recording this before my birthday episode. That's how far in advance this is. And yes, I'm doing it. Well, you would have heard I did an episode for my birthday. That's how far. I mean, that would be that would be old news by the time this is out.
I feel like that's cheating.
Yeah, but we'll definitely get Lewis back on to talk about the process of distributing once he's sort of gone through literary agents for his novella, which means you have to do it now.
Yeah, no, I actually have.
Yeah, you said it on air.
It's out there now.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Lewis. That concludes this week's episode of the My Generation podcast, and we'll see you all next week.
Oh, yeah.